Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day. And wherever it is that you're joining us from around the world, thank you, as always, for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much for just sharing our content, for all the positive feedback. And as always, we love to bring you some amazing conversations and amazing guests. And as always, my friends, today is just as great as every other episode, but I'm really excited that I have been able to connect with today's guests, following them on TikTok, what they share about technology innovation, talking about AI. So I figured that today, what she has to offer is something that is wonderful as well for the K-12 and higher ed space. So I would love to welcome to the show Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, how are you doing today?
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate being here today.
Excellent. Well, I am excited that you're here. Just like I mentioned in the introduction, I stumbled upon your TikTok account, and I everything that you said just really resonates with me. Being a fellow ed tech lover myself, and just
Mhm.
seeing the changes in educational technology and just technology as a whole from when I first got immersed in it in 2018 till now, and of course seeing the big boom with AI and what you share, I was just like, this really resonates and this needs to also be heard, within our K-12 higher ed space. So before we get into the conversation for today, can you please give us a little brief introduction and what your context is within the technology space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a system architecture expert that specializes in AI and predictive analytics. And that's just a really fancy way of saying I help people figure out what technology is best for their business or their public sector environment. A lot of times at school districts or higher education. And just decide what the best way is to implement this emerging technology within their overall culture so their team doesn't freak out, and they can have this synergy of really maximizing technology outcomes. So my consultancy works across the globe, and we're very, very privileged to have great contacts like you in a lot of different verticals throughout industries.
Oh, that is wonderful. And that's great that you share that with us because, as you know, and I always go back and just I just defended my dissertation yesterday, and it was
Congratulations.
really on talking about the implications of artificial intelligence within the school setting. And it's really like 70 episodes that I did from November 22 to no to December 2024. So it's a nice snapshot there. So we'll talk a little bit about what I've observed and then just kind of run parallel to what you have observed. But I love that you mentioned that you do have that experience in speaking, with schools and working with teams
Mhm.
because I know that not everybody has it quite figured out and it's still very much so like the wild, wild west. So,
Absolutely.
yes, exactly. So, we'll go ahead and get into that. So, I just want to ask you first and foremost, yeah, as far as your background in the technology space and like you mentioned, consultancy in AI, what are some of the big things that you're seeing right now within your consultancy within the education space? What are some of those fears or barriers that you're currently trying to help school districts kind of overcome so that that way they can get these systems to work for them and for their educators and students?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as you well know, a school district or an educational environment is one of the most difficult and complex to implement a new technology in, just because of not only the cultural dynamics, but they don't have a lot of backfilling on, their core team or on their, staff. They are already pretty strapped when
Mm.
it comes to implementing that. And we did one of the largest school districts in the United States, and it was the largest implementation I think I've ever seen. I'm pretty confident in saying that just because there had to be movement in staff, so much so that they had to bring in temporary staff to be able to oversee how the technical implementation was being tested. And we're kind of over here like, that's great. That's cool that you saw a solve for that. But you need to be able to own your technology strategy and really understand what that means, especially when it comes to AI integration. Because no offense to teachers, love teachers, but a lot of times our academic colleagues can be very, very resistant to change, right? Just because they've been doing their job the way that they've done it for so long, and adding a level of technology in already, a very hectic classroom environment can be incredibly stressful. So totally valid, right? But when it comes to what we're seeing in AI at the school district level, and I'd be curious if you agree, there is so much data and so much foundational needs and processes and assessment of cultures. Each school is a different culture, each district is a different culture, and each one really needs its own implementation strategy in order to maximize the output of their technology. So, really, there's still so much in the forefront of building out what that foundation looks like. AI hasn't been something that they can really utilize quite yet, just because of all of that front end work that needs to be done to, really implement it in that kind of complex structure. And again, I'd be curious your thoughts on that too.
Yes. No, absolutely. And that's something that we see. And one thing that you did mention is really the lack of resources, and not necessarily that I'm talking about, Chromebooks or devices and things, but
Oh yeah,
the human resource. Not
exactly.
enough people within a district, and now you're adding this additional component for and people that may not be equipped or aware of what's happening. And many times, like you mentioned, yes, in the classroom and the teachers, you do have, and I always love to quote my friend Renee Dawson, who says you've got your speedboats, your tugboats, and your anchors. You've got those that will go to a conference or see a video on TikTok, and that's it. They're just going to go ahead and run in and implement without any just regard to privacy or regard to accounts or
Hmm.
anything. And they're
Hmm.
just going to go for it because they think like, okay, this is going to go ahead and save me time. Then you've got the kind of in the middle, like the tugboat, where I'm like, okay, I'm kind of waiting and seeing. But then, like you said, there is that resistance faction, and that's one thing that is very interesting and does coincide with the findings in my dissertation, where we see in the second quarter of my research, we did see this kind of branch of now you have the resistors and you have the hey, let's move fast and break things kind of
Hmm.
crowd. And then I always say it's like I always like to be in the middle and bring these conversations to the table to see where we can kind of meet. But you're absolutely right. And in the sense that right now, a lot of school districts are kind of getting that guidance, but they're still a little lost because there's still that disconnect between the classroom where teachers kind of have that autonomy in the sense of, I have control of my classroom, and they may just bring in apps just to use and use them because it's either, hey, somebody's using it on Twitter, I'm doing it for social media, or I'm actually trying to help that work without the CTOs knowing what may be happening. And then, of course, there's that risk of data. So, what are some of just some of the best advice, maybe 2 to 3 tips just that you can share with CTOs during this time?
Hmm.
Because I'm sure they have their hands full. And again, like you mentioned, we need to make sure that we're all conveying the same message and moving in the same direction. What can you tell them to kind of put them at ease? Maybe 2 to 3 things to get them started.
Absolutely. And a CTO for a school district or an educational entity is no joke, right? That is this, definitely a very challenging position. I always say the CTO or the CIO in the organization is really the loneliest position, right? You're supposed to be this know all center for all things technology. But ideally, especially right now, we see typically that those CTOs don't know a ton about technology because that wasn't, the generation they were educated in. So they're still learning just as much as their team. And so my advice would be to own those I don't knows, right? There's never going to be a full baked answer that anyone expects you to have. Lean on your team, lean on your consultants if that's what you're doing, lean on your vendor, and make sure that you understand that I don't know is a fine answer. I don't know what to do about this issue that we're having at this said school district. I understand that it's causing a lot of chaos. I hear you that you're frustrated, but I don't know how to solve it. But what I can promise you is I'm going to put my full energy into listening to you, hearing to you, and finding a solution for you. So that would be one tip. The other thing I always tell CTOs, especially educators, because they're used to, being so involved and engaged in their culture, that a lot of times when those senior administrators get to that level, they still think they have that same pulse on what's going on with each school. And they don't. Like, at the end of the day, even if you are the best award-winning CTO in the entire universe, there is still an executive bubble that you don't hear what's going on the front lines. So you need to look at your implementation and those organizational assessment data as absolute gold mine nuggets of data. You need to understand that your teachers, your staff, your other administrators are really telling you what you need to hear. And a lot of times, luckily, our teachers can be very, engaging in that type of thing, because they're teachers. They're used to those types of, surveys and quantitative feedback mechanisms. So know that the organizational assessment data is going to be so foundational to setting your technology strategy. Don't try and set something when you haven't heard the problem yet.
Oh, I love that. And those are great tips. And that's for that side, like I mentioned, those that are still trying to figure it out and owning those I don't knows. I think that's something that's very important, because now I want to ask you on the other side, what if we have those CTOs that are just running and gunning and just saying, hey, we're just going to open this up. And just because maybe we want to have that notoriety, or we want to just open this up because we want to be the cool kids and things of that sort, what might be some of the risks that they may run into that they need to consider, that instead of doing the move fast and break things, let's kind of be more intentional of what we're doing? So what might be, 2 tips that you would share with that type of CTO?
Absolutely. And, those CTOs are sometimes scarier than the CTOs that have kind of this tenure. They might be more not digital literate in that way. That CTO, right, we still need to listen to our communities. We still need to have that foundational piece. But knowing you can't argue with data, I always say when I go in to talk to a CTO, understanding the risk of failure from a quantitative level. If we spend $30 million on this new AI pilot project and it fails, not only are we losing $30 million because we rushed it and we didn't listen to our staff or our communities, but also now we have to go into calculate the time loss and the fatigue with that implementation. Because you mentioned the lack of resources. It's like running uphill in sand at that point, because you've lost buy-in at every level. And we always say the most important or most expensive piece of an implementation are those redesign, redo, re-engage, because that is so much harder than starting off on a strong, solid, intentional foundation plan that's been engaged at every level of your organization.
Excellent. And that is wonderful. Like you mentioned there, just really kind of just slowing things down and really talking to stakeholders, really taking in everything into account. Now, in my experience, not only just within my district, but neighboring districts, and obviously, being from a small district, we try and be as resourceful as we can. So one of the things that you mentioned is kind of the money spending. And one of my biggest things and my biggest fears, not only just speaking for my district, but for friends that work at other districts, is currently within our education space, we're starting to see, kind of a couple of applications, maybe like the top 5 that are really kind of making their way and separating themselves from the rest. And obviously people get excited about that. They're like, hey, we need a subscription to this. We need a subscription to that. And my biggest fear has always been, if you do buy in and get that subscription, you're spending that much money. But what if something happens? Because for the most part, all of these applications are wrappers. They plug into OpenAI's API and or any other large language model. And so what happens with that company is no longer there, maybe within a year, because what if Google, with all the releases that it's done,
Yeah.
is it going to go ahead and kill off some of those apps? the things that OpenAI now is offering, is it going to go ahead and kill some of those apps?
Mhm.
So how might you suggest that navigating the space to find that point where, okay, we can feel safe about this investment, or maybe, you know what, maybe this is not the time. So what can you share there to
Mhm.
make better decisions in that
Yeah,
case?
that's such a good question. Definitely starting with that mindset of thinking that way. And so when we're talking about budget, the first thing we need to look at, that first part of your question, is what is the total cost of ownership? So a lot of this sneaky software subscription model, I always compare it to no other business or industry blatantly lies to their customers outside of like organized crime or like the cartel. Right. So, there isn't a ton of trust in that industry. So, you really need to sit down and go, okay, I'm signing this contract. I know from the day I sign, that's when I start paying. They don't care how long it takes me to implement that. If I use it, what does that support structure look like? Are they going to pay? Are they going to, charge me up a level to have additional support because my teachers can't figure out how to use it and we need that? So you really have to focus on how much does this cost and what do I get? And that's one of those things where you really, really need to be disciplined in who I'm working with. For my clients, we never work with a vendor that can't prove it. You might be on even my quantum clients, okay? So quantum is new. We have a lot of new people, new innovation to the industry. That's awesome. But we're not going to be the first. All right. We're going to go in and spend with vendors who we look at this like a selection. What do we get? How much is it? What's our support? And how do we make sure that you're not going to ghost us after we leave? Who have you implemented before in a school district? And I'm going to call them. So you need to prove it. Never don't check those references. Even if it's a small, tiny $25 subscription a month, you still are responsible to your community, especially in the public sector, for understanding what that cost means and what you get after that. There's been so many clients that I've had that have come to me being like, hey, I just kind of rogue bought this AI, system because it claimed to integrate with my ERP, my CRM, my LMS, really quickly. And I thought that that was going to be, a great option because I wanted to fix this breakage. And now they won't talk to me and I can't figure out what's going wrong. I can't even figure out a phone number to call them. There's no email, there's no anything. And that is where clients get stuck, is in that, ghosting phase, as I always call it. So being sure that you're meeting this vendor and holding them accountable as a partner to you. That's what they need to show up, not a set it and forget it. You bought my system. I'm done with you. Especially in a school environment where we don't have, you have maybe one, two IT people per school, with 6 grades. And that's something that we need to make sure that we understand how the vendor is going to show up and support us, or the SI is going to show up to support us in that way.
Yeah. Now, that's something that you mentioned that is so important because I have seen where, there's vendors that come in and say, okay, for adoptions, book adoptions, things of that sort. And it's like, hey, this is what we offer. They share it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the greatest thing. This works great. This is going to plug into this LMS. This is going to do this and so on. But like you mentioned, the surprise is, okay, we got it, but wait a minute, why isn't it plugging in?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not quite there yet, and things of that sort. And then all of a sudden you bought into that, but now the teachers or the end users are now like, you know what, like this, I'm not using
Workaround.
this. This is
Yeah.
not going to work for me, at all. And that's because there is a committee of teachers that goes and vets all of these. But I want to ask you for in that case, because you mentioned something that's very important because we need to do our due diligence and always make sure that all our stakeholders are, at least well informed. So in that situation that you are making that tough decision,
Mm-hmm.
what might you recommend as far as a CTO? Who should those conversations be had with at least to make sure that you kind of have that fail safe in case like they're all in, but then, you have somebody that kind of balance things out and says, hey, well, maybe have we thought about this yet, or come up with this component? Because sometimes I feel that a lot of decisions can just be done
Mhm.
abruptly,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then it's kind of like, all right, we did it. Now we got to be all in, but now
Mhm.
we can't get that buy-in. So
Mhm.
what might be just some fail-safe advice for
Mhm.
any leader, whether it's superintendent, CTO, or curriculum?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's such a good question. And when we do any sort of technology implementation, even if it's super small, it needs to have a core team. And that core team needs to be made up of whomever is, sponsoring the project from an executive level, whoever is managing the project, whoever is responsible for developing the project. And then the end users should make up at least 50% of that core team. Because if you don't have them in the room, you're building blind. You have absolutely no idea what their requirements are, especially in an environment like education, because they don't have time, to run around and sit. And that's why a lot of times when we come into a school district, there can be a lot of friction between the vendor and the district. This is not a normal business, right? And they're treating you like a normal business. And you're so frustrated because you don't have time to sit down and have 37 meetings a day about requirements. You need to do it differently and meet each other where it's at. And I think in that situation, really engaging those end users from day one. We always call it phase zero, right? Before we've selected anything, we have an idea. We want to be on the forefront of AI because we think our students deserve that, and we're going to start to move towards that. We're not sure what that means. We're not sure what problem we're solving. So there we come to the end users. What is your experience, and what is something that you feel like could really benefit your processes in the classroom. And so that's where we really understand where that core team comes from. But the minute I walk into a steering committee meeting and there's no end users in there, I'm like, this meeting is pointless. It really is. Like, respectfully, this is pointless because the people that actually matter in this conversation are not in the room.
That is wonderful advice. Definitely resonates. And like I said, it's just things that even through research and, experiences and hearing things out, oftentimes that's one of the things that happens is that not everybody that needs to be in the room is there. And at the end, the final decision maker just says, hey, this is what we're going to go with. And now we just got to make it work. And so it's almost like you're working a lot harder. And it's very similar to
Absolutely.
what you mentioned. It's like you're running uphill in sand because you're trying to make it work, and you're going to tire out. You're not going to be
Mhm.
able to make it all the way to the top and try to take everybody up with you. I mean, you need to really have those end users in mind. So I'm going to switch things up a little bit. And now I want to ask you, because we've been talking about just directly school district to vendors. So now I want to talk to you about vendors, some of these platforms in
Mhm.
the way that they are approaching, or maybe in the way that they are
Mhm.
selling to a district.
Mhm.
What are some things that they might do better? I know for myself, I'm always looking at the privacy settings. I'm always looking at the terms of service. I'm looking where the data is stored, what kind of data is stored. And it's definitely one of the things that I'm always looking for is full transparency
Mhm. Mhm.
of their systems. So, what are some things that if you are working with vendors, and I'm sure you have that experience, what are some things that they can do better to put their final, their either that school district they're working with and those end users at peace and ease?
Howdy, y'all. It's Farmer Fobbs from Book Creator. Now listen up, partner. If you're wrangling lesson plans and trying to keep your students engaged, I got just the tool for you. Now remember, every student and teacher deserves a yeehaw moment, and Book Creator can give you just that. Book Creator makes it easy to get your students creating, collaborating, and sharing their ideas all in one place. Book Creator turns any classroom into a digital frontier, whether it's interactive notebooks, portfolios, or good old storytelling. Now, did I tell you it plays nice with all the other favorite apps? Egg Smash It. I mean App Smash It with Adobe, Google, and much more to take creativity to greener pastures. So saddle up and give it a try. Use promo code MyEdTechLife for a 3-month special treat.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think we can't always rely on vendor salespeople to do better, right? I do think there's a level at which they, do take responsibility for what they sell, but these are salespeople. They have quotas to meet and they don't always give the best recommendations when it comes to systems because their main job is to sell it. So if I were speaking to a vendor, I would say have a school district practice, right? You guys come in here, you fail all the time when it comes to school districts. There ends up being this huge fight and this chaos, which nobody wants on either end. Nobody wants a failed implementation. It's embarrassing for the district, it's embarrassing for the vendor, and it just doesn't go well. So you need someone that is a specialist in this environment, just like you have specialists in manufacturing and you have specialists in distribution and you have specialists in food and beverage. School district is not a normal business, so go in and look at those requirements that actually matter to them. And by the way, why don't you use your data set that you already have in front of you and ask your current users, what would you like to see differently? I think that's one thing that I'm always so perplexed why they never seem to do, and how they act like they've never been in a school district in their lives. And they're like, well, we're not getting the engagement. And it's like, because they're teachers. Like they're not sitting around all day just waiting for your call, right? They are very busy educating the youth of America, right? So you have to go to the table and meet them where they are. When you're talking about things like requirements, you're not talking to technical people. So you need to bring people in the room that are able to speak the same language. And I call myself and my team professional translators because a lot of times what they're saying, and then the client looks at us like, what? And we're like, okay, this is what that means. This is the functionality. And then they kind of shut down because they're so overwhelmed by this entire process. So I would say, to the selection committee, again, should feature over 50% in end users, that they need to know going in there that this is a war, right? They need to come in with their requirements ready, that they built, not the vendor, right? That they built, not the vendor, right? And then also they need to understand that they have every right to say, you know what, that was very cool. All of your slide deck there, great, awesome. But what about my needs and my functionalities that I want to see? Can you show me that? And if that vendor's like, well, we don't really do that, they're telling you what kind of partner they're going to be in that conversation. And you want to take that as a huge consideration when you're making that choice, right? It's not what was best for, New York City School District. It's about what's best for your school district and who's going to show up as an implementation partner, not just a vendor. And same with the SIs. In my experience, I don't know if you have the same experience, school districts have a lot of challenges with system integrators. They are technical integrators. That is their job. It is like oil and water, mixing them with the school district because they don't have the counterparts that they would have in a normal industry business, right? And that can be a huge struggle for both people involved. And that's a lot of times why we have to, bring in temp workers or a lot of times an additional third party to backfill those because there's just so much work to do that this district doesn't have that resource to make that happen. But remember, it's your demo, it's your software, it's your environment, and you're allowed to ask whatever questions that you want. And that's a lot of times what we're doing in the room, my team, right? And saying all of that is very cool. We're super excited. You have all of this on your roadmap. But this is what this client is looking for. Can you go ahead and show us that? We go over the scripts with the vendor beforehand to make sure that they're clear about we don't want to hear any crazy mumbo jumbo that's not happening in this environment. Innovations can be 2% part of the conversation, but these people, their time is limited and you need to make sure that you're, really addressing what they're looking for.
Amazing. There's definitely so much to unpack there. And I really wish that, a lot of the platforms that we work with, K-12 and going to conferences and everything, I understand that there's the show aspect of it of wow, look at what we can do and look at all the bells and whistles and so on. But at the end of the day, I love what you said and being able to sit down and just say, okay, this is what we are needing. Can you provide that? And well, but we've got this button, but we've got that button. It's like, no, 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 no. And sometimes I think, like you mentioned, the importance of having somebody like you or your team there, especially when there might be like, somebody that's like, hey, like, let's go, let's just go for it. Let's just move fast and we're just going to get it and so on. Thinking like, hey, if we get it, like everybody's going to use it because this is what everybody's using, or this was the next big thing that I saw at the conference. So we have, really have to get it. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the content that I see that you put out, and especially like recently with a couple of videos, is many times I think that when we are trying to say like, oh, well, we want to be innovative, so we're going to get this app, we never really get to the root of the problem, as far as, is it really the technology that's going to help enhance the learning and the pedagogy? Or might even work backwards, where sometimes I feel that maybe some of the tech may enhance bad pedagogy because, we're not meeting at the same place or trying to solve the same problem. It's just layering something else on top of that and hoping like, hey, this will be gone. So what advice might you suggest to school districts that may not really see or trying to get to the root of the problem before they purchase something?
Yeah. And I see this happen all the time in school districts, again, just because they don't really understand the process. Like on average, we see a lot of districts that haven't purchased new, like core operational software in 30 years, right? So it's not like they have like tenured teams that have been through this. And that's pretty typical, right? When you're looking at a bigger ERP system or something like that, that where there's not a lot of people that have been through that. So define what you need, right? Whether you're working, with a consultant like our team or, your internal define, because the vendor is going to define that for you very quickly if you don't have the knowledge to say like, thank you very much for your input, but this is actually what we need. And a lot of times school districts don't have the time. They don't have the industry insight to know that's what happens. And they also, they want to be able to get something done on a quick timeline so they can, service their community, so they can service their teachers. Even the, most well-intentioned project sponsors want to get this done so that they can, prove to their communities that they got it done. But what we have to do is sit down and be disciplined around the why. It's like, that executive, I walk in and they're like, 2025, our initiative is AI, like full stop. And I wait for them to finish and we're like, okay, cool. Like, why though? Like, what problem are you wanting to solve? Are you just wanting, like, we could call your ERP system AI if you wanted to, because technically it is. There's predictive analytics in there. There's predictive maintenance in there, all AI. You already have AI, right? In some level, shape or form. We could give you a sticker that says AI or maybe a hat, right? Like, but in that capacity, we have to understand, why are we doing this? How much does it cost? And what is it going to take to implement? And remember, I just remind school districts, because sometimes they forget that the why is going to be different for each end user. And that's where you need to source it from, not, the boardroom, but the classroom.
The way we learn is changing. Are you ready to transform education? Welcome to Yellow Dig, where learning isn't just another assignment, it's a conversation, a movement, a game changer. With Yellow Dig, students engage naturally, sharing ideas, exploring concepts, and driving conversations that matter. No forced post, no busy work, just real learning. Educators, you'll see the difference. Higher engagement, deeper understanding, and a thriving community of learners who want to participate. From higher ed to workforce training, Yellow Dig fuels curiosity, collaboration, and connection inside and outside of the classroom. The future of learning is here. Are you in? Yellow Dig, connecting minds and igniting possibilities.
Oh, that was powerful. I really love that. And oftentimes it's the other way around.
Hmm.
oftentimes, where it's like straight from the top and this is what we're going to do instead of going from, like you said, the classroom up, because eventually those are those teachers that you want that buy-in. And who's better to give you more data than the teacher that's there using it, working with the students? Is it really going to enhance it, or is it really just, does it turn just into compliance when it's like, hey, just do it
Absolutely.
30 minutes per day or 30 minutes a week, for per subject, then it just becomes compliance. And so is it really enhancing the teaching, or is it just like, okay, just make sure you do it, just so on my reports it shows that you did your 15 questions for the
Hmm.
week and you're good to go. And that's the sad reality of it. So I really
Absolutely.
love that last statement was so powerful that you said it's really taking into account your teacher, how it's working with the students, or how it might or might not work, and then take that feedback to the top and say, okay, let's see what we can do here. And are we making the right and proper decision? Because at the end of the day, it's something that's going to cost money. And so you're going to lose out on other resources that might be more helpful because you're all in on something that you think is going to solve the problem. And one of the things that you mentioned that I love too is right now, because everything is AI, it's really
Hmm.
just seems more of that marketing term like,
Hmm.
hey, this is AI. This has AI. But I love what you said and say, hey, you know what, like that one platform, or you know what, that one thing, like maybe like you said, just put that sticker there that says AI. Maybe you might feel more like
Yeah.
calm about it and say, hey, I'm already using
Yeah.
AI,
Look at me.
yeah, but you didn't know it. But because it's not the AI that is being shown at the conferences and the next shiny tool and the one that's going to solve the world's problems with a chatbot that's going to teach your student, the content and so on. So sometimes it's like, it's okay to slow down and
Hmm.
really see things through and make those clear decisions and points. So I really, really like that a lot. So Kyler, as we kind of start wrapping up, I want to
Hmm.
ask you, in your experiences, and maybe you don't have to get too much detail, but maybe if you can share like 2 wins and maybe 2 losses that you're currently seeing as you're working with in the K-12 space and maybe even higher ed. What are some of the positives that you're seeing with AI and some of the not so positives that you're seeing with AI?
Yeah. So I love that question. So I think two of the wins that I'm seeing is specifically, I lecture all over the world, but I'm seeing this emergence of my higher ed colleagues bring more industry into the classroom, and be able to help their students bridge that gap between what does it mean to, be on my computer coding AI, building those triggers and all of those different things in the classroom, but then actually going out and doing it in the industry, because it is so much different, as any AI engineer would understand. And a lot of times students don't come out of a higher ed, classroom, even a high school classroom, with a project that they've built. And I'm seeing that really transition to teachers reaching out to their academic, or their industry colleagues to build these types of programs that are moving forward. Um, I'd also say, that we're seeing the new frontier of students in the classroom that are, bringing we had digital natives as a generation, but now we have AI natives, which is crazy. I can't imagine, teaching that generation. But we have teachers that have dedicated their lives to educating our students wherever they are. Whether we have, children that don't have computers at home, or we do, we work with a lot of STEM nonprofits. And I just see these teachers show up and chameleon for these students wherever they are. I am so biased there. My mother is a previous retired principal. My sister is a first grade teacher. My dad was a teacher. So I worship teachers. Like, even my kids' teacher, they want the shirt off my back, I'll give it to them. I think that they are, just absolute angels on earth when it comes to this. But to see them rise up and embrace students that want to talk about things like ChatGPT, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the risks and the benefits. It's not blacklisted, right? Because it's not going to be blacklisted in the workforce. It's not going to be blacklisted on their home computer. So let's get curious about what this means. What are the risks and what is this tool? How do we understand it? Just like we understand anything else. And I'm really proud of our education system, the ones I've seen for starting to make that shift. And I would say the two negatives, and I know I can be long-winded, so I'll keep it short, but education is not a business, right? We have something that is financially responsible, and we understand that. But when we have leaders that are leading it like a business and not a community organization in which it is, then that's where I see them get in trouble. Educators and administrators, leaders that have never been in the classroom, please go spend 3 weeks in the classroom shadowing different grades, and you will have a totally different outlook on what that means. Negative is bringing in those fancy CTOs, bringing in those fancy CIOs, thinking, oh, they're going to revolutionize our architecture like it's, Ford Motor Company. That's not the same thing. So I would invite leaders to remember that those administrators serve their teachers, not the other way around. And then the second negative thing I would say is not teaching students the understanding of basic AI in higher education. So the understanding of data and risks and things like that, they often come out of the workforce, come to us. They've never, really experienced messy data. Go out in your communities, find a local business. I promise you their data is a mess. And give your students an opportunity to do service in their communities by helping those small businesses figure out how to automate their data. So those types of things where they think, this is just a simulation, absolutely doesn't have to be that way. We can arm our students with this type of experience.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Yeah.
there was definitely so many just gems that you just dropped there that I know all our listeners are definitely going to take that and sprinkle it onto what they're already doing great. So thank you so much for sharing that, Kyler. And before we wrap up with our last 3 questions, Kyler, I want to ask you, or actually give you a little bit of time, if there is a school district currently right now, a leader, an influencer that's listening to this podcast right now, how might they be able to get a hold of you, reach you, and make that contact?
Sure, absolutely. Well, my DMs are always open. That's how we met, right? On TikTok. You can also DM me on LinkedIn. I have a personal goal and mission to answer every single one of my DMs personally. So I'm happy for to have an informal conversation. I'm always up to talk tech. Obviously, I'm super passionate about it. And as I said in the beginning of this episode, which was why I'm so excited to join you, this is one of the most complex environments. So give yourself grace and feel free, to just reach out for a random chat. We can have a call and talk about what you're going through. If nothing else, it's always a good vent session.
Excellent. And that's true. Kyler was so kind. Like I said, I was scrolling through TikTok, and here I get this video, and immediately I was like, heart, follow. And I was like, hey, would you like to be a guest on the podcast? And I got an answer, and we made it happen, and we're here today. So definitely reach out, guys. It doesn't hurt to just get some knowledge, get a little bit of direction. And Kyler, like, she just offered herself up as far as her DMs and her account. So take advantage of that. CTOs, if you're listening, if you have some questions and maybe you can build a great collaborative relationship with Kyler and her team, make sure that you do reach out. So thank you so much, Kyler. But before we wrap up, we always love to end the show with these last 3 questions. So Kyler, I hope that you are ready. All right.
Okay.
So question number 1, as we know, every superhero has a pain point or a weakness. And for Superman, that kryptonite was what weakened him. So I want to ask you, in the current state, and we'll say of AI, all right, what would you say would be your current AI kryptonite?
Just the speed of change. I am super dedicated to helping our young engineers. But at this point, I even had a call today where I was like, I got to be so real with you guys. I have no idea what you're talking about at this point. Because, they're so far above me. They're building things on Catapult and doing all of these amazing innovations. I want to be there to support them. But sometimes I have to just get out of their way and let them do their thing. So the speed of change of this technology is never something I've experienced in my career. So, it's about this balance of guiding them, but also not, ruining the call with all of my very basic questions about what they're doing because they're doing great stuff out there. So I would say that is probably my kryptonite on the AI side.
Oh, there you go. But that's pretty cool, though. I mean, sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, you got to embrace that. I don't know. But hey,
Yeah,
you know what?
exactly.
We can figure it out. So don't worry. So that's
Yeah.
great, Kyler. All right. Question number 2, Kyler, is if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I would have a billboard that said "Tell the truth," and I would put it right outside of like SAP's headquarters, in Pennsylvania and Germany, and all of my other vendor partners, which we are frenemies, right? We get along with our vendor colleagues as long as they show up for our client, but they need to tell the truth. Like it is time, you guys. Like it just looks bad for everyone involved. No one wants to fail the implementation. Just tell the truth in your sales processes. That's all. That's all I'm asking you to do. So that's what would my billboard, probably with my face like pointing at them or something like that.
That is perfect. Actually, that billboard could definitely go a long way in the K-12 higher ed space too for all of the platforms and all the apps that are out there. So I love it. All right. Last question, Kyler, is if you can trade places with one person for a day, who would that be and why?
Yeah, I think that that's such a great question. I spent so much time thinking about that one because it's such a good one. And I would probably say Sarah Blakely. I really admire her entrepreneurial journey, and just I've admired her as a female leader in a space that didn't have a lot of innovation. And though you don't think of like Spanx and you think of innovation, right? That actually was something that didn't exist before she created it. I think the way that she's built the culture of her business is something that I'd really love to be a fly on the wall of like, how did you build it and maintain that culture through growing it through $1 billion? That is so incredible to me. I really admire it. I've read all of her books, and I would probably, just be so honored to be in her presence or trade places with her for a day.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And Kyler, thank you again. I really do appreciate you hopping on the podcast. Thank you so much for accepting my invite. And again, I'm a huge fan of your content. I definitely learn a lot from it. I know I comment on there a lot saying like, hey, say it louder for the K-12 space too, and things of that sort, because I think what you're doing is great and the messaging is wonderful. And a lot of people need to be in tune with what you're saying. And I think that's very helpful. So I definitely recommend all of my listeners, everybody listening to this show, please make sure you follow Kyler, follow her TikTok. She has some great content there. And again, follow her on LinkedIn and make sure that you do connect. But thank you as always. And for all of y'all, make sure you visit our website, myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 330 episodes that we've done over this 5-year span. It has been a wonderful experience. And thank you so much for your continued support. I want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. Thank you so much to Book Creator, EduAid, and Yellow Dig for sponsoring our show, believing in our mission, and again, just bringing some amazing guests like Kyler and amazing conversations into our K-12 higher ed space so that we may continue to learn and move forward. As we know, technology is going to be changing from day to day, but it's always great to be readily equipped in season and out of season. So make sure you check out all those episodes. And my friends, until next time, don't forget, stay techie.